Thanks, Kamia. I'm going to read part of a book I've been working on for what feels like forever. It's a section from the early part of the book, which is called Crossing Black Water. It's a memoir about my mother and me. Even now, 15 years after my mother's death, I think of her in motion, boarding an airplane, walking 3 steps ahead of my sister Mira and me on our way to school, rushing to catch the bus she took to work. At home, she practiced yoga or Tai Chi in the living room while Dad watched TV. When she sat down to knit, her hands moved quickly, a fluid motion neither Mira nor I can replicate. The only time I remember her slowing down was weekend afternoons when she lay on the floor of her bedroom to soak up the afternoon sun. She flipped her braids above her head and dozed until one of us woke her for tea. I wish I could have told her I loved her, but when I needed them most, words failed me. We were not a family of easy I love yous. I think Mom told me she missed me only once towards the end of her life, before we knew it was the end, but at a moment that was fraught and ugly rather than loving and tender. No Hallmark movie ending for us. Not that Mom would have wanted this. Such phrases were American, superficial and meaningless, unnecessary for us because they stated the obvious. Of course we loved each other. Of course she and my father missed us when Mira and I were away in boarding school. We were a family. And if my last words to her had been, I love you, would she have said, as she had in the past, what is this I love you business? What do people mean? Perhaps better to say stay and bridge the distance between us, her in a hospital bed in New Delhi, me at home in Pittsburgh. I can't hear you, Mom, I said. We were on the phone. I sat at my dining room table with the Sunday Times spread out before me. The brass chandelier above the table filled the room with a warm light. Outside, the February sky was overcast and it looked more like dusk than early morning. Winter had been brutal. Icicles hung from our gutters and the sun had become a memory. At least Mom was missing this, I told myself, though she never complained about the cold. My mother, Manorama Kothari née Sood, had been in the hospital for 2 weeks. Her voice sounded like she was speaking through a wool scarf wrapped around her face, and the line crackled as if this were 1964, not 2004. Oh, Mom, I said, I've forgotten everything I want to tell you. Definitely not a Hallmark moment. I had spent years tutoring students for whom English is a second language. I taught creative writing, and I wrote, if not to make a living, then in order to live. I am the descendant of an opium trader known for his beautiful English handwriting, the granddaughter of an English professor, the daughter of a woman known for her facility with language, a woman who had spent her professional life editing and rewriting other people's words. And I failed to find one single meaningful thing to say to my mother in what would be her last hours. A generous reader might blame the situation. After all, what kind of life prepares you for this moment? Your mother 6,000 miles away, recovering from a surgery she didn't want. But the only improbable thing in this situation was me in Pittsburgh instead of New York, where in 1961, my parents had, improbably, met and married, and where my sister and I were raised less than a mile from the United Nations, where my mother worked. I'd been in Pittsburgh for 15 years, and my parents still wondered when I'd come home. When did my grandparents stop waiting for my mother to return home? My parents had lived their entire professional lives in New York with frequent return trips to India. Once they planned to retire back home, as they called it. Instead, they returned every year, and this year Mom had gone ahead so that she could spend 2 months alone with the extended Sood family. Her family, not Dad's, who lived in Bombay and who merited a brief obligatory visit on her way to Delhi. But 6 weeks into her family trip, Mom found herself in a private room in a hospital. She'd had an operation to remove an intestinal obstruction. My father flew to Delhi the day of her surgery, and now 2 weeks later, he sat next to her while she tried to tell me something on